Hey, what's good, everybody? Welcome to another live session with the Hype Magazine. I'm your editor-in-chief, Jerry Dobie, and today, I have the very distinct honor of having 17-time Emmy award-winning storyteller Tom Rinaldi. And today we're here to talk about a baseball should-be legend if he were still with us, by the name of Lyman Wesley Bostock Jr. He was a California Angel and one of the best hitters in Major League Baseball. He was tragically taken from us in the height of his career by a single shotgun blast by a knucklehead who made a mistake. No excuse, but this guy got away with it. And Tom has taken it on as a personal charge to ensure that we know who the man they call Wesley is, what he could have been, and what he actually contributed to the fabric of baseball and humanity before his untimely demise. Thanks for being with us, Tom.
Thank you very much, Jerry. I appreciate the intro, and I appreciate you already painting a context and a background for Lyman.
Okay. Look, very poignant story. I've listened to the first of the episodes. Talk to me about why this story became such a driving force for you as regards being a storyteller.
We had the opportunity, Jerry, back when I was at ESPN to tell this story 14 years ago. And while we had a lot of time in terms of television length, between 13 and 14 minutes, there was so much more beyond what we were able to include in that story. And really, a vast majority of that was not about the way Lyman died. It was about the way Lyman Wesley Bostock Jr. lived. As you mentioned, Jerry, rightfully, how he contributed, not only in baseball, but how he contributed to different venues in his life, to different people in his life, to how he forged a path as the son of a Negro Leagues player, a father who he barely knew and yet followed in his footsteps. Someone who arrived, I know we'll probably touch on this, Jerry, somebody who arrived really in the crux and the peak of the civil rights movement and all the unrest across campuses in America when he arrived as a first-generation college student. Somebody who then took that risk to be a part of the cause, as he and his widow Yvonne would call it, right? She called him a soldier. And to be a part of that. And then how his advocacy, his use of his platform as an athlete continued to unfold as he made his way faster than anybody could have ever imagined in Major League Baseball. Even in death, Jerry, Lyman continued to contribute change, because the laws changed in the immediate wake of how shocking the verdict was in his case when this terrible event happened that took his life, of which he had absolutely no blame. Even in death, he created change. So there were all of these reasons why we wanted to do this deeper dive and paint a fuller portrait of Lyman. But more personally, Jerry, more selfishly, there was also an aspect of the story that carried a big regret for me. I had the opportunity to encounter the man who killed him 30 years after that shotgun blast. And I, for lack of another way to say it, I botched it. I thought I was prepared. I thought I knew how I would do. I thought I knew the right preparation and approach. But when it happened, I mishandled it. And it's been something that's just sat with me for all these years. So much more so the fuller portrait, but also selfishly a chance to revisit, in essence, what I would call a regret.
As I understand it, you just happened upon this man as he was exiting a vehicle or something like that, and you came face to face with a killer, somebody who basically has no remorse and kind of refused to speak to you. What do you feel you could have done different in order to get some sort of response or some answers from this doc.
So, and I'd be curious as to what you think, Jerry, as a journalist now, and as someone that conducts these interviews, meets people, what the value is of a question, even though you may not get an answer. How does that serve the audience, the reader, the viewer? How does it serve you and who you might be representing? These are the questions I think that I've lived with over these past 14 years since that encounter happened. Leonard Smith is the man who killed Lyman. And we can touch on what happened in his case, which we document fully across the 8 episodes. And we think will really surprise people. And to a degree may provoke the same reaction it provoked back then, which is just shock and then shock to anger. Not something unique, obviously, in reaction to our criminal justice system and how it actually manifests. But in this case, this man who was living his life 6 blocks, Jerry, away from the intersection where he killed Lyman. That's where he lived. We were outside this tenement in Gary where he lived, and he pulled up after going to get some groceries. And we play the audio of that encounter in a fuller way than is heard or seen necessarily in the television series, the television feature. And even though it's clear that Leonard Smith doesn't really want to have much to do with me, is there a value there, Jerry, in asking the questions, even if he doesn't answer them, as a proxy for the family? To serve the audience, maybe just to know that in this tiny space of time that I might ever get with this man, I know that he heard those questions asked. He faced them. They were presented to him. Instead, and this is depicted in the later episodes, I was so surprised with what time had done to Leonard Smith, what he looked like physically, Jerry. His limits physically, how he had been ravaged in a way through time and hollowed out, that I just didn't really react, I think, in the way that I could have or should have.
Can
you relate to that, Jerry? Do you feel like you go back in your mind through interviews you've had, experiences you've had, where you say afterward, boy, when she gave me that answer, I could have followed up. Or when he didn't really answer my question, I could have approached it differently, or whatever it may be. As someone who is a journalist and does interviews, I wonder what your take is on it.
I think, my only similar experience, I'm a former combat soldier. My only similar experience is coming around the corner and encountering, an insurgent. And could I have not put him down?
Wow.
That's my only experience. And in journalism, can we ask those questions that put something on their mind as a proxy, as you said, as a proxy for the family, that puts them down and gives them no peace, and that we've documented that the questions have been asked on behalf. I think it brings value. I think it brings, for this gentleman, a type of punishment that he escaped early on by not hearing from the family, by not having those questions asked. Not why. The biggest question being why. Why did you take this man's life? What was it that you saw that triggered you? I understand the woman may have been in his company, but he didn't know what was going on. There was absolutely nothing going on. The biggest question is why? The question that he'll have to answer to his creator on Judgment Day. I think putting them out there, those are the missiles that he needed to hear, and that they would have brought value just as punishment.
And of course, Jerry, I would never equate coming around the corner and facing what you faced in your time in military service and the incalculable decisions that have to be made like that, with your training, with your understanding, with the defending what you're there to defend, preserving your own life. This is a far, far different context and setting, of course. But the notion that there might be a value in the question itself and whether that gets an answer, I think is something that has stayed with me. It has sat with me, even though I would say this is very, very secondary, vastly secondary to the opportunity to have people know more about this great ball player and this fascinating man, more than the way he died. And sometimes, Jerry, when people, famous or not, die in a notable way, the end of the life almost eclipses all of the life. And that was something that we didn't want to happen. And that's why there's 8 episodes devoted to Lyman.
I think that, to absolve you a little bit, surprise, in a situation that for a journalist is the fight or flight kind of situation. You're confronted by this subject who you've been hunting basically to get these answers and to confront, and actually getting that opportunity and looking in that person's face and looking in their eyes can give you pause, can give you a moment of, not to say choked up, but as a young reporter, I think that at least you asked him something and you engaged, and he knew then that others outside of himself were interested in the situation and that he is not going to have any peace. So I think that you did your job. Could you have done it any better?
Yes.
I mean, that would have been,
yes.
A walking contact kind of
yeah.
moment, experience. I think it was lack of experience. And it just happens. It's just a shock, and it's human. I forgive you. If you needed forgiving, forgive yourself. Because what you're doing now is such an amazing job of storytelling. I love the layers and nuances that you put into episode 1. That's as far as I could go as a storyteller. As you broke it down, I think you're doing a magnificent job, and keeping this young lion's memory alive. What you're doing is making him immortal, and that's more than anybody could ask.
Interesting, Jerry. In that first episode, I think we try to build the context around Lyman Wesley Bostock Jr. going to what was then, and you heard this part of it, San Fernando Valley State College, which is now Cal State Northridge, right. and trying to put people in that space of time to understand what it might be like in these sets of contexts. So just consider, you're going to go to a campus of more than 15,000 students where there are fewer than 500 students of color. So already that context, you're going to arrive in the fall of 1968. And as we say in episodes 1 and 2, anyone who has lived, Jerry, through the early years of this decade in the 2020s can relate or feel a kinship to the later 1960s and what was happening in this country then. The third context is, here he is, he arrives, he joins the Black Student Union, he finds a peer group there, and 2 months into arriving, he's in a relationship with the person, the voice who is the heart and soul of this series, this podcast, Yuvine, who becomes his wife and then tragically his widow. And shortly after that, a white coach assaults a black player on a field in a football game. And so other athletes, other students of color, the Black Student Union wants to know what's going to be done about this. They go to the athletic director. The athletic director says you need to speak to the university president. They decide to go en masse to the administration building. And what unfolds, as you heard in episode 1, again, I think anyone who has seen people energized and taking to the streets here in the early parts of this decade, the early years, can relate back. And I think as you continue to listen, Jerry, and you hear the voices from that era, both the famous voices tragically lost, right, whether it's Dr. King, whether it's Bobby Kennedy, or those who were there, not only that day, but you'll hear in episode 2 in a follow-up in January of '69, greater police presence and hundreds of students at then San Fernando Valley State are arrested. They're herded onto school buses, which are already waiting for them. They're taken down and booked for protesting. And how this affects Lyman's path and his journey and keeps him from even seeing a baseball field for the first 2 years. And remarkably, how he's able to pick the sport back up and ignite his way toward being a major league player. So we hope that this will get people talking about that time. And I also hope that people will know and understand. Sorry, I'm outside here.
I love it. You're in Hawaii.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just hope that people connect with now the young man who would go on to become a big time baseball player. I really hope that people do, because to me, that's what invests you in his journey, Jerry, right? You're getting to know this young man, what's at stake for him, and it's significant.
I think what I took from it was you're laying out a story of someone with tremendous intestinal fortitude during the 60s to be able to stand and deliver and on the front lines, basically, during the civil rights movement, during the time when people were waking up and speaking out. And, not only was Dr. King there, but, right around that time, Malcolm is making a difference. Right around that time, SNCC is making a difference. The Panthers are feeding people and we're not going to talk about them taking over the state house, things like that. But you have a young man who put it on the line and stayed the course. And despite, an entire government movement against what he was standing for, being freedom, equality, and the ability to just be a human being and treated as a human being. At that time, that wasn't very a popular idea by certain sections of our country. And you're laying that out, and I appreciate that. And there are, like I said, layers and nuances to this story, things that people nowadays take for granted. Some, to just name, the foundational Black Americans or whatever are speaking on these different things. They're not very popular. This young man in the movement, the civil rights movement was not active, was not popular. He suffered the consequences of the change in images of what I call psychological slavery in America during that time, because he didn't get as much support from his own people, probably, as he could have.
Exactly. Jerry, exactly. And that's one of the other layers here that I wanted to get your take on. When you hear Uveen, when you hear some of Lyman's classmates from that time and family talk about the pressure that he felt from other members of the Black Student Union, other peers telling him, baseball, forget that. It has no meaning. It's not important. It's not your calling. It's not your path. And here he is, again, the son of a great player that he doesn't have a great relationship with. He's worked hard to get this opportunity to go to college. He feels like this is my opportunity. This is a passion and a calling for me. And yet he has to, in essence, be tested by those around him who question whether that's his calling, when he's not even seeing a field for the first couple of years. I'd love to get your take on that, Jerry, because to me, I think that's also a fascinating lesson to Lyman's journey.
I think that from the inside looking out on this type of situation, there are those who put their failures and tack their failures onto your dreams. And
wow,
they say that your dream is, unreachable or unimportant because they failed to follow theirs or execute or be prepared for opportunities that presented themselves to them. And they see you moving forward, and those that should support you often hate you for your determination and dedication to achieve your dream, no matter what's going on around you. That's something that within our community, they call it the crabs in the barrel mindset. And it's nothing new. And I believe that he was experiencing that. And it's an utter shame that you don't get the same type of community support that other cultures do. You have the amazing ball players that come here from Cuba, Puerto Rico, South America. Whole communities get behind whatever it is they're standing for, and their career. And they say, this is your opportunities to succeed and bring others up with you to create opportunities for others to take care of their families in this line. And just to be honest, among the Black community, we do not have that same unity and mindset and push. It was more readily available or present during the 60s with the elders than it is with the successive generations. And as we see babies raising babies, those pieces of armor and that we had as a community and as a village started to fall away. And by the time Mr. Bostock Jr. was there, it was already being manifested that we weren't going to be supporting each other as much as we should. This was a shining light. This was a young lion who had an opportunity to make a difference on some different levels, and they should have supported him. They didn't. But that's my take.
I know, Jerry, but later here, one of the other episodes, a storyline, one of the later episodes that you'll hear, which has, I think, continued to resonate and fascinate people, is Lyman gets to the majors faster than anybody ever would have thought, and he breaks out faster than anybody would have thought. He becomes an outstanding hitter. He finishes second in the American League to Rod Brew, greats of all time, a legend. And he then has an opportunity to sign a big contract. We explained his recruitment by the Yankees, Reggie Jackson wanting to George Steinbrenner, all of the power and prestige that comes in. Lyman turning away from that, wanting to go back to Southern California where he'd spent most of his childhood. And he goes into a terrible slump his first month after he signs this big contract. He's got all the scrutiny, all the attention on him. And I want to ask you, Jerry, if you've ever heard anyone in any walk doing this. He goes back to the owner, Gene Autry at the time, who had been a famous, the singing cowboy who hosted a TV show and was an actor, who owned the team, and told him, Mr. Autry, I don't want my salary for the month because I haven't earned it. This is a player who had made $20,000 for a season, and he was going to make more than twice that for just that month. Never seen money like that. And yet he wanted to refuse it. The club told him, Lyman, relax. If you hit a home run every game the rest of the season, we're not going to pay you anymore. So take the money. He took the money and gave all of it to charity for that month. He gave it to youth groups in Southern California. He gave it to the Vermont Square Methodist Church, where he had a faith community with his mother. And I've tried to find a comp, an analog, anything that is like this. I haven't. To give up your month's salary because you feel I haven't earned it, I'm not performing. And after he does that, by the way, in what turned out to be his last season, he goes on a tear and he's nearly batting 300.
Wow. Yeah, I haven't heard that kind of integrity from anybody. As regards money, you're like, oh, I'm just having a bad time. Pay me anyway. You know what I mean? You know, so no, I think that's an original story, and one that I've never heard repeated throughout my 59 years paying, attention. And I wouldn't have gave mine back. I probably would have contributed half, to a charity of some sort, which he probably would have done regardless had he been hitting anyway. It seems to be that he was that type of person that the community was greater than himself, and there were items, that were more important to him than his own base comfort, and he would have contributed maybe the majority of it anyway. I don't know that much about him. I'm learning about him, and I'm grateful to be learning about him through Wesley, through the podcast, and your amazing storytelling and your amazing research and attention to detail, and you presented it so magnificently in what I've heard so far. And I know that new episodes come out every Monday. Shout out to you, Tom. Shout out to Fox. And Fox doesn't hear that much, but this is something that is very important. And the fact that you got the green light to put this type of energy into this production, just, it's a well-deserved salute. And thank you.
Jerry, this is the first episodic podcast that Fox Sports has ever done. And they have, we have some big personalities, Club Shay Shay, which is a very successful and popular podcast with Shannon, Skip and Shannon, whose show is so popular. They have a successful podcast. Nick Wright, who is a great broadcaster and voice, has What's Right. But this is different. It's one story told in a serialized way across a number of episodes. And I think Fox Sports was really eager to explore this space. And when presented with this story, we've had wonderful and full support from Fox Sports. And we're grateful for that, so that people can learn more about Lyman's life. And again, beyond the way he died. I will say too, I think something that I hope when you get to these parts of the episodes, they come out in pairs every Monday. The first 4 episodes are out now. So next Monday, 5 and 6, the Monday after 7 and 8, it's 8 parts. I also think, Jerry, another part of his story, which I hope people connect with, is the notion of the power of family. Mm. So Lyman spent time in his childhood in Gary, Indiana. And for those listening to this who aren't familiar, I would guess, Jerry, that you are, and what the name Gary, Indiana conjures. Usually it conjures 2 things to people. Number one, it's the home of the Jacksons, the Jackson family, the Jackson 5, which of course gave birth to Michael Jackson, the king of pop. That family is from Gary. 2300 Jackson Street, incredibly, is where the family grew up. But secondly, in a much darker way, for many, Gary was known as the murder capital of the United States, the deadliest city in the country. And it's a small city. It had been a thriving steel town. When that began to change, the demographics, the challenges, the poverty line, so many issues started to really take shape in Gary. And it's been intractable to a degree, very difficult to solve. So with all of that, Lyman had a lot of family in Gary, Jerry, and every time his teams played in Chicago, that family would come and see him at old Comiskey Park. And he would sometimes go back to Gary for family dinners with his uncles and his aunts and his cousins. And he did this on what turned out to be the last night of his life. He had asked several teammates to come back with him to family dinner, to come back and sit with his uncle, Tom Turner, who has since passed. And several said they'd love to do it. Lyman makes the final out in his final game, and he leaves a bit more quickly than his teammates realized. And Kenny Landreau, a great player, played many years in the major leagues, is emotional, talking about the regret he still feels, Jerry, that if he had gone with Lyman back to Gary, maybe this never happens. Maybe the night takes a different shape. And Lyman is never at that intersection where this estranged husband, this jealous and enraged man fires this one shotgun blast. This notion that even though he had made it, however we define that in our lives, that he still had that deep, real connection with his extended family, with his uncles, with his aunts, with his cousins, whose voices you all hear through the podcast. I think there's a power in that. And in a way, it magnifies the tragedy, because here he was doing something that he loved with people that he loved, going back to see this family who had supported him, who had believed in him, who took great pride in him. And ultimately, it's after spending that time, having this simple notion come up, hey, where is this girl that I used to read to when I was younger and she was younger? Yeah, she's a couple of blocks down. You want to go see her after dinner? And then we'll go back to Chicago. Yes, they go for 15 minutes. The two women in the house say, can you give us a ride across, Gary? They get in the car, Lyman, his uncle, these two women, they have no idea that one of the women's husbands is waiting in a car outside and trails them. And that leads to the murder.
We're not going to give away the entire docuseries. I want to invite you to get involved by listening and participating. I felt from the trailer to the first episode, I felt a very powerful story, a very powerful, I don't know, even have the words at my age and as many dictionaries and thesauruses as I may have read, I don't have the words to really say what I felt, but it's something that just reaches into your soul and yanks you forward and goes, man, I got to know more about this. And in this day and age, can I find someone of the same stock as Lyman Wesley Bostock Jr. that I can, who is alive and living this type of example and presenting the same showcase of commitment to community, commitment to family, while at the same time being an amazing elite athlete or politician or teacher or whoever you may be, whatever industry you might be in. Who can I lift up and show my children this is someone that we can be proud of? This is someone that we have to gather around and uplift and support, because they're going to make a difference. They have the potential to make the difference. And they're, just a great person. So Wesley, the docu podcast, Fox Sports, Tom Rinaldi, he is this has been over 20 years that you put work into this. Is it about that, what you said?
14 years
14
ago
years.
was the original story, Jerry, and we're grateful again to do this deeper, fuller exploration and portrait. And I just want to leave it with two final notes, Jerry. One is our great gratitude to Yvene Whistler, Lyman's widow, who is yet another example of that incredibly powerful matriarch of somebody, Jerry, like, I think as an example, we might cast Lyman. Yvene is right there with him. That portrait and example of strength through loss, of continued faith in family, of somebody who built out a life, got remarried, had a daughter, had that marriage end, built a career as a nonprofit executive, just a wondrous person. And again, she's the heart and center of the voices that you'll hear across these 8 episodes. And the last thing I'd say, Jerry, is I'm just grateful for the time and the interest that you would spend with me on this. I know that sometimes in terms of the sports world, some other sports might seem to captivate given communities. And baseball is searching, I think, in some ways for that connection to a broader audience and a broader community. The connection, I think we're both old enough to say it once had, that it's looking to, I think, to try to recapture. And I think Lyman is an example of that connection. And we hope that people give the episodes an opportunity and a listen, and that if they do, that they feel a connection to him and they're carried along in his journey. And I'm so grateful to you for this time.
Oh, thank you. I make this commitment to you that each week I will make some mention through the Hype magazine of the episodes I will support, and I will reach out to the incredible Jace and make sure that I have supporting artwork, episodic artwork to go with it. We will support all 8 episodes each week. We will mention and support through social media as well. And
thank you, Jerry.
Thank you. Baseball means a lot to me. I am a first cousin of Larry Doby, and so baseball is in our family. This means something, and I appreciate.
Wow, and that's a lot more. That's a lot more than a baseball reference right there, Jerry. About as good as it gets in terms of sports royalty when it comes to the meaning of the platform, the risk, the advocacy, the change, all of it. That is royal lineage right there, Jerry. Wow.
Tom Rinaldi, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your effort and the energy that you put into this story, and for recognizing how important and how many layers it has, and delivering in a very clear manner, in my opinion, the importance, and painting a picture through words that is just as vibrant and impactful as Monet or Gauguin have ever put on canvas. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Jerry.
All right.